Um, Not much for me to say, just to welcome Stewart. And for a lot of those that don't know Stewart, Stewart's a pretty recent member that has made rapid progress. And I'll be honest about it, I like the cut of his jib. And I think Stewart is setting an example rapidly in gliding. And I think he can actually teach, particularly the younger members, teach the younger members how to advance quickly. So without further ado, I'll pass you across to Sean, and off you go, mate.
Thanks.
Thanks, Stewart.
Yeah, near enough. Right, great to see so many people turn up. What I want to talk about is just about my experiences of bridging the gap between hang gliding and sailplaning, and tell you a little bit about how I've got to where I am and some of the observations. It's all just my humble opinion, right? So I'm sure there'll be people out there who have different views, but it's just get me some discussion going, and I'd be happy to take questions as we go through. So what I'm trying to do is just, identify the differences and where the experience is relevant, and where the similarities are between the two, because probably more similarities than a lot of people would think. What the carryovers are between the two things that can kind of help in flying technique and so on. And I'm not covering which is better. So nobody ask me that question, because I'll refuse to answer it, okay? And all in my humble opinion. So first, how did I end up here? Well, it all started out way back when I was at school. I've got into hill walking big time. We're doing Monroes with the school club and all the rest of it, through scouts and so on. Spent a lot of time from 78 onwards in the hills, watching the views, seeing what was going on. That kind of developed into more serious climbing in the 80s, when I was climbing in the Alps, doing things like the Matterhorn and Rindershorn, various other mountains across there. And it was there that I saw my first evidence of free flying. I saw a paraglider fly off the top of a mountain. And I thought, that'd be a cool thing to do for my last Monroe. So I decided to sign up for a course purely with the objective of flying off the top of my last Monroe to the bottom. Big grand finale, end up in the pub and get pissed. However, I kind of quickly recognized that there was a lot more to this flying lark than just flying from the top of a hill once to the bottom, So I got into paragliding in 89 to 95, and that kind of peaked when I went to the Himalayas, and I flew off a mountain called Le Bouger, which is just next to Everest, on an expedition that we did there. That gave me a kind of real kind of feel for adventure. But in parallel with that, I was kind of thinking, I'd seen hang gliding, I'd seen the kind of performance advantages and how you could do a lot more on a hang glider than you could in a paraglider. So I decided to learn to hang glide to kind of push the envelope a bit further. And basically from 1990 onwards, I flew hang gliders, and I converted to what's called Class 5 hang gliders in 2013. I'll explain what that is later on. So that's basically how I've got here. Now, one thing I just wanted to say, you'll notice down in the bottom right-hand corner, it says Katie Tracy Photography. Now, Katie is someone who roves around with the hang gliding community, taking photographs for the annual calendar and all this sort of thing, and asked her if she could use some of her photos in this, just to kind of give some quality photographs instead of mine. So you'll see her logo there every so often as photos come up. So just to give her a bit of acknowledgement of her work there. And anyway, the journey has kind of got to where I am now with gliding. October 2021, I took up gliding, and had a few wave flights in already, and I've got about 80 hours now. Not many this month, I have to say, but 80 hours so far. So the hang gliding career itself, it's taken me, one thing about hang gliding is it's taken me to a lot of places. These are the sort of countries that I've flown in hang gliding competitions, and also for leisure. So you can get around with a hang glider with your own device, which is something I've taken a lot of advantage over the years. I fly in the UK Nationals and the Open Series, and I'm currently the Class 2 champion, sorry, Class 5 champion for hang gliding, have been for the last 2 years. I have to say though, the competition actually takes place in Class 1, not Class 5, so it's not as grand as it sounds that, but that's where I am at the moment. And competing in international events in Greece and France over the years as well. So good bit of competition, but never quite managed to meet the British team. So not as good as it sounds, but never mind. In terms of gliding, I'm now a syndicate member in an LS6C, Scott that's here tonight. since October, and literally just had 5 flights in it so far, as we all know what the weather's been like in the last few weeks, and 80 hours of sailplane. So why am I sailplane? Well, this adventure me getting my hang on. Why would I bother sailplaning? Well, the kids have left home, big thing. Yeah, more time in my hands. I live 20 minutes away from the wave soaring centre of Europe, as far as I can make out, certainly in terms of Scottish sites. Yeah. If anyone from Aboyne or Feshy will leave, will leave that contentious moment there. Like the idea of indoor flying in winter. Winter flying in a hang glider in Scotland can be a quite unpleasant experience. And I've done plenty in my hand, but the sensation's just coming back to my fingers around about now since my last winter flight. And the other thing, though, probably the biggest thing, is expanding kind of the weather and the geography envelope. You know, every aircraft has its flying envelope, and by opening up the sailplane, that envelope becomes a lot bigger. And again, I'll talk about that later on. And just about improving the overall flying experience, because, you know, there is so much change on it. I love flying. I love the idea of gliding and, you know, using your own wit to get around the country. And this is just more of the same from that perspective. I just love the challenge. I thought, though, in terms of what I was going to cover here, I thought the first thing is just to cover the topic. One of the things we quite often get with hang gliding is confusion between the different types of sport. So it's really important people understand that, yeah? So just to start off with, this is hand gliding, okay? This is my wife having a wee bit of hang gliding at the weekend there. Not to be confused with hang gliding. This is wingsuit flying. I've no idea why, but anyway, that's wingsuit flying. That's not hang gliding. And this is paragliding, probably one of the most contentious differences between the two. A paraglider is quite different from a hang glider in terms of what it does. It's part of the same association and all the rest of it. And there's always it's a bit like snowboarders and skiers. There's always a bit of friendly, sometimes not so friendly, banter between the two. Yeah? Interesting, actually, a paraglider is technically a hang glider, according to the definitions that the FEI have. But we don't talk about that too much. Yeah. Okay. This is hang gliding, and it's quite diverse in terms of what it is. And you can see the definition of what a hang glider is: a glider capable of being carried, foot launched, and landed solely by the use of the pilot's legs. I do know one person that's leg, but anyway, legs usually. Yeah. And the word hang glider covers all these classes. So the types of hang gliders there are, this is the kind of the original hang glider. These are called regalos, and they were around for a long time. You don't really see them very much at all now. There's the odd person just mucks about them on a beach type thing, but they're not flown seriously. And this is where kind of the hazardous sort of reputation of hang gliding came, because a lot of these didn't have what you call luff lines. So they had a propensity to go into an unrecoverable dive. But you'll see all gliders, hang gliders now have a means of holding up the trailing edge. So it promotes recovery when you go into a dive. And you'll see in the other types, this one here, this is a class 1 flex wing sports class. You'll see in the top of it has a king post. From that king post is called luff lines, and they come down to the trailing edge. So if you go into a dive or get any negative on your wing, it holds up the trailing edge and creates a recovery vector, if you like, as you come out of the dive. This is the type of glider that people would fly now just straight out of school. You'll see that the front half of the yellow bit is double surface, and from behind that is single surface. So relatively low performance, easy to handle, fun glider. And you still get a lot of them around, pretty well known. Now this is a class 1 flex wing, or topless, they're sometimes called glider, yeah? And this is kind of state of the art in terms of flex technology. And how they work is weight shift. So physically, by moving your weight from one side to the other, you are increasing the loading on one half of the wing, and it distorts the wing and effectively acts like an aileron. So by moving your weight from left to right, moving your weight back and forward, you're controlling it. So there are no control surfaces at all, but the whole wing is a control surface because it gets distorted by the weight movement, yeah, through sail warping. Typical performance competition machine, 15-to-1 glide angle you'll get out of these now. VNE, 85, as your answer to your question, 85 kilometers an hour. VNE is not quite so critical in a hang glider as in a sailplane. It's actually quite difficult to get anywhere near VNE or to get flutter. You have to be doing pretty damn serious things to get that done. Partly because you're physically so far forward in the bar, you can't really get any more speed on. Yeah. And the majority of gliders in the UK and the world actually are that type. Yeah, that's the majority. That's the type I flew until 2013. The other type is class 2 rigid wings. They are a rare species. There's probably more ostriches in Scotland than there are of these. And they are a rigid primary structure, movable aerodynamic surfaces. It's basically a sailplane. Yeah, they're quite often will have a stick control. But the thing is, you have to be able to take off and land on your feet. Now, this is where the interpretation of taking off and landing on your feet is really at the limits of what you'd be talking about. Yeah, I think that's part of the reason you don't see a lot of them. If you're going to do that, you might as well be in a sailplane. It's generally where people get to when they've got them. So there's not a lot of them around. And where they are, it tends to be aerotow clubs rather than hill launching sites. Okay. And you can see the stats there, 24-1 at 40 kilometers an hour and 70 mile an hour VNE. I'm jumping kilometer an hour, mile an hour knots, but never mind. Yeah, we're used to that. Now, this is the type of glider I fly, but that's myself there flying. And this is a class 5 rigid wing. And they work by weight shift, but in a different way. When you move your weight, you're not actually moving your weight. You're moving the base bar, and the base bar pulls a wire down, which operates what's called a spoiler-on. So you see these bits in the top of the glider, so spoiler-ons will bring your induce your turn and also provide a bit of yaw control as well. So the glider can have a more pronounced nose angle than it would have if it didn't have that drag on the tip there, controlling the yaw. So again, other than that, it's the same as a hang glider. You're exposed, you're hanging in a harness, and you can see I've got my undercarriage down in this particular shot. And they've got flaps as well at the back, which are used for exactly the same reason you use flaps on a sailplane. So very similar in feel to a sailplane, except for the fact you don't have to worry about yaw. Yeah, which is one big major learning point for me as I came into this sport. Spans 14 meters, 20-1 glide ratio per the advertised glide ratio, but we all know what that means. And sink of 120 feet per minute. So reasonably good performance. You can do a lot in these. A VNE 110 kilometers an hour is typical. So the first thing I want to do is just how does the learning experience compare between the two sports? I think the way I'd summarize it is it's kind of commensurate with the risk and the liabilities. There's no doubt at all that there's a lot more to learning to fly a sailplane. There's a lot more rigor in the process than you'd ever get in learning to fly a hang glider. But to be perfectly honest, the way to put that into context is to think about energy. That's how much energy that's in a hang glider, just half mv squared, and a hang glider on its approach versus the amount of energy in a sailplane on its approach. And you very quickly start to realize that, hang on, this level of rigor is appropriate for the sort of value of the assets, the amount of energy in the assets, and so on. So from my perspective, I would say that the methods are very similar in terms of repeated exercises and until you get it right. And the bronze exam, for example, is more or less exactly the same in hang gliding as it is in sailplaning. All the same topics, all the same level of kind of examination. But this is what I was hoping to show, a wee video of a typical process of learning to fly a hang glider in the UK at the moment. So I'll just run this through. Now, this usually there'd be a few days in a classroom doing your theory, your bronze, and all the rest of it, or your bronze equivalent. But this is the most modern method of launching. What we do is I get a flat field. You've got a car connected to a long line round a pulley. The instructor's in the car, and the car drives alongside the student while they launch, which means they can see exactly what the student's doing. They can provide feedback. In some cases, in a quiet day, you can even actually speak to the pilot on a low ground skim, Yep. There's two pulleys. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's true, because then they'd be going out, wouldn't they? Yeah, so there's two pulleys. And you spend maybe 3 or 4 days perfecting the takeoff run and the landing run. So in essence, it's very similar to what we do here, but just the scale is all smaller, And generally speaking, we then take some up onto a relatively medium-sized hill. Bishop's probably a bit bigger than you would normally do. You take into a smaller slope, get some introductory soaring flights. Again, very similar in concept to what we do in gliding training. And then, generally speaking, we'll take people into the bigger hills, get a bit kind of used to the height and the more turbulence. This is a launch off Glen Shee, just to build up confidence. That whole process typically would take 2 or 3 weeks in good weather. If you had good weather every single day and you were focused on it, yeah. And the problem for us in Scotland at the moment is there are no schools. So to actually physically do this, you'd have to go down to deep south to some of the remaining schools. One of the things I want to point out as well is we do aero tow. This is an example of aero towing here. So you've got a set of wheels, which is convenient when you're aero towing, which you leave behind. And that's the airborne. That's a Balado. Unfortunately, though, that's the aero tow group has now just shut because of lack of numbers in Scotland. But there's still about 3 or 4 aero tow groups operating out of England at the moment. Yeah. And then one of the other things you're doing is kind of learning to land, and you're just repeating and repetition all the way through to get to the point where you can actually put in a good landing. Okay. And then before you know it, the next level most people go to is to sign up to some of the competitions. All the competitions in the UK have a sports class, which is kind of a non-competitive, fun kind of competition where you can bring people in sports class gliders. They get the retrieves, they get all the kind of social side of a competition just to get them into the flying. And these are just some shots from some of these competition flights. And then for Scottish flying, finally, you can graduate to this sort of flying, 8,000 foot in wave in June this year, over the top of, or over the side of Ben Nevis. So that's basically the process that we go through. So you can see the similarities. It's just more compressed. It's kind of definitely less kind of rigorous. And this is where some of the handovers come, because one of the things I was discussing with some of my hang gliding colleagues is the use of like CB SIFT and all these sort of things. We don't have, well, there is an equivalent in hang gliding, but it's not particularly pushed. And talking to people about the number of incidents that have happened that could have been avoided through these sort of practices is quite significant. Not many people I've spoken to said, oh yeah, if I'd done that in such and such a case, I wouldn't have had this accident. If I had an accident myself, that CB SIFT would have actually stopped happening on an aero tow. So, it kind of just shows you kind of that the two sports, there is obviously communication between the two, but there's a lot of kind of crossover and potential learning between the two, which I think is quite important to think about. So in a nutshell, the sailplane experience, yeah, professional, comprehensive, and challenging is what I'd say it was, is that additional level of rigor that you get in the thing. And to be honest, one of the things I liked actually was diversity of people you're flying with as well. So you get lots of different views, lots of different opinions, which helps up to a certain point. But that's, that whole piece is kind of really, really good as far as I'm concerned. But one of the things I heard a lot when I was going through the training was, don't forget, if you'll push the stick the wrong way because you're a hang glider pilot. That's something I never experienced in the whole learning thing. And I've been trying to think about why would that be? Why is it not a problem? There's a couple of ways to think about it. It depends how you visualize your flying. So when I'm flying my hang glider, I think of speed up as move my body forward. Slowing down is move my body back. Right is move my body right, move my body left. It's exactly the same as the stick. Yeah, it's no different. Some people might have a different model in their mind in terms of what am I doing with a stick and why, because technically speaking, if you fly left on a hang glider, you move the bar to the right. But I don't know if it's just me, but the visualizing as how am I moving my body seemed to overcome that. Yeah. And actually, if you think about relative to your body, a hang glider is flying that way, sailplane is that way. If you take that factor into account, you're actually moving the bar the same way as you would otherwise. One of the things I did think, though, if you are used to flying in a supine position, so a microlight weight shift is absolutely the opposite way. Yeah. And where that stick would be is moving the opposite direction. So I don't know if that's where that whole story has come from, but I thought it was just an interesting kind of observation that confusion isn't necessarily always the case in a hang glider pilot, but it's certainly worth making people aware of it during the training. Now, in terms of takeoffs, whoops, missed that. How do I get that to run? Launching. Doesn't seem to want to run. There we go. this is what a typical good hang glider takeoff looks like. Pretty non-eventful type thing. That is a big difference with sailplanes. The intensity of a winch launch is quite a kind of learning experience for a hang glider pilot, but certainly as well one that you get very comfortable with very quickly. In terms of landings, this is what a typical landing looks like in a hang glider. And one of the things I think it's worth saying is, you know, there's a lot goes on in a hang glider landing as well as in a sailplane one. So, for example, people that undercarriage, you have to get your undercarriage out in a hang glider. You don't get your legs out, you're going to have a sore nose. Yeah, so you know that whole undercarriage bit still applies. You have to adjust your flaps. You have to get all these things right as you come in, and it's really important to time your flare right. That shot I just showed there with the glider climbing really high, that's a too early, too high flare. Now that was actually done deliberately because the guy was coming slightly downhill, and there was a fence just in front of him. So what he did is it's equivalent to dropping a wing. And you know, spinning the glider to stop it to hitting a fence. So he gave a big flare. So the whole thing about timing and prep and setting up to come in is actually the same with hang gliding, but the actual activities you need to do are very different. And one of the things I struggled with the most was translating this radical flare that you do in a hang glider would just stop, you know, into this transition on a sailplane. And the thing that actually got it for me was when I suddenly twigged, hang on a minute, if you touch the back wheel down first, and that's what you're trying to do, then the rest just flows. And that was the eureka moment for me. And once I started thinking about that, and obviously you don't whack it down like that, but you know, touching that rear wheel down. So it was interesting. There were certain things that certain instructors said that just worked, you know, and it probably only worked for me because of my hang gliding experience. It might not have worked for someone else, but it was interesting to see which models. So some models that got described to me, and I think one of the things I found as a hang glider is some of the models that were presented were quite simple, trying to make it simplistic. Because I was a hang glider pilot, I was over-analyzing it and saying, that's not right. Because it probably works at a simple model level, but if you over-analyze it, it didn't work, you know. So that whole landing thing was a bit of a transition for me, yeah. So in terms of the conversion challenges, highly procedural in comparison to hang gliding, which took a bit of getting used to, but as I said earlier on, it's very easy to recognize why it's like that because of the commensurate risk that you're dealing with. The other challenge I had was this whole thing about ground run and rudder control. And I loved it when someone said to me, all you need to do is think about it as a broom, yeah, and go like that. So I go home, go like this for several hours. Then someone says to me, when you do your ground run, it's not that. And that whole experience of trying to coordinate was really like, you know, patting your head and rubbing your belly type stuff. But I'm sure you all know that anyway. But particularly for coming from an aircraft, you just don't really worry about yaw. You know, what's yaw? You know, it was quite a change for me. Yeah. And I suppose in terms of the landing challenges, the speed control is much more regimented. Yeah, on a hang glider, I put my flaps on and actually use my speed to adjust my angle of descent. So I'll speed up on a draggy flapped glider and it'll come down on a steeper gradient. I'll back off, obviously not below a certain speed, but I'll back off to bring the rounding out a bit. So that was a bit of getting used to. Flare, as I've said already, meant something completely different. And if you flare a glider, you're going to have a wee bit of a problem mopping up all the carbon and fiberglass. And expect it to be good every time. That's just completely that's just not fair. Because I'll have to confess, if you go along to a hang gliding competition on an ill-wind day with the best pilots that there are in the UK, you will see pilots coming in and landing badly. Yeah, and as a member of the public can tell it's a bad landing. That's what I mean. Yeah. So you know, and to be honest, you get off of that because people walk away. You know, we've actually got a crash cage in a hang glider. That triangle you see is actually very useful to protect you from impacts. It's actually got weak links in it as well, so it actually collapses to protect your arm and body. You know, so that expectation of being good every time was kind of a key thing. And judging landing surface conditions, I've never had to do that. You know, I can tell if there's a slope from 3,000 foot, no problem, and you know, all this sort of stuff. But what's that surface like is definitely something that I'm still learning, and I'm sure it'll probably take a bit of trial and error. Scott's saying hopefully not too much error to get these surfaces just right. Yeah. And in the air, different learning yaw control, reducing airspeed. Airspeed, I don't refer to my ASI when I'm flying my hang glider. I never look at it unless I'm going for best glide and McGreedy and all the rest of it. I just fly by the noise, the feel, and all the rest of it, Whereas that's quite a different proposition. So all this checking and the right. And the other thing I've learned as well is that airspace happens much, much quicker. And the hang glider, you could probably order the air map from Amazon before you actually end up in the airspace, Whereas, in the sailplane, it's just on you in minutes. And that for me was actually quite, a place I'm used to flying in the hang glider all the time suddenly felt quite confined, And you basically just need to recalibrate. I've had a really, really good week in the XC development week. I went out with Phil Dolan, flying up Edsel and all that sort of way. And one of the biggest things there was just recalibration. If you're used to 1 in 20 glide, it didn't quite hit me in the back of the head with a slap, but it wasn't far off it for stopping in every flaming thermal I found. And that whole thing about recalibrating is going to be a big thing, in terms of having the confidence to just use the glide of the glider and make the best of it. And but I'm getting there with that. Yeah. And in terms of things that are the same, lookout identical, except you're looking a bit more down than you are up. Thermaling identical, I'd really say, in terms of the technique and all the rest of it. Ridge soaring the same, but much less clearance. We'd be much closer into the hill and other than a really rough day, So that's something that can probably be a bit of a trap for a hang glider pilot, being too used to being so close to the ridge and trying to do the same thing in a sailplane. So one of the things here is just watching out for traps. Instruments are identical. The only instrument we don't have on a hang glider that you have in a sailplane is artificial horizon and turn and slip, for obvious reasons. Yeah, everything else we've got FLARM, Varios, speed to fly, moving map, all the rest of it. Yeah, speed to fly, MC identical, and common characteristics of the sports themselves. I'd say we fly cross country. You've seen from the videos earlier on, the world record out and return distance in a hang glider is 764 kilometers. So it's reasonably respectable. That's not been done in a Scottish winter, I have to say, but anyway. The height gain for the UK is 16,000 foot on a hang glider. That was actually in the lee of the Cairngorms and someone that took off from Glen Shee and they landed round about Brora. He's never flown since though, which maybe tells you something about getting to 16,000 foot in a hang glider. When we do fly across country, this is just a collection. This is not my flight. Until last year, this was one of the record flights for the UK. This is a flight I did in June the 7th, I think it was. I think Alistair flew past me sometime, but I don't think we actually saw each other. Significantly underset, as you can see by the meandering at the end of the triangle there. But that was Glencoe up to Balhools Bridge, up to just short of Spean Bridge and Arachmore, and then back again. And this is out and return from Strathire up to Loch Tulla and back. And this is a flight from Strathire to Edsel. So these are sort of typical flights we'll do in a summer in Scotland. And there's the odd ones will be bigger than that as well. The other things, we can do aerobatics. It's limited. I don't do aerobatics. I'm too scared basically to do aerobatics. We do have a national league, world and continental competitions. We do fly wave. We do fly thermal. We winch launch. We aero tow. We hill launch. We fly tandem. We have training licenses and we have insurance, believe it or not. Yeah. And we fly with instruments. We have lots of retrieve stories, which it's always good to hear the gliding retrieve stories because there's a hell of a lot of similarities between the sort of messes we can get ourselves into in a retrieve. And we drive a lot. Yeah. And ultimately we have fun. So I'd say that's kind of the characteristics I think that link the two. But in terms of the differences, what's this? Yeah, it's Rannoch Muir. That for me is the big difference, right? If you look at the landables in that area, the nearest one is Loch Tulla, which is about 8 miles that way, and the other one is Balhools Bridge, which is way down the end of that glen there. Whereas I can be flying around there at 500 feet without worrying about it. And, you know, our normal landing field is just this wee patch here, which is covered in gullies and all the rest of it. There's a power line on the side of it. But to get the hang glider in, as long as you don't stick your foot down on the gullies, it's absolutely fine. And there's not many places that haven't landed along there beside these roads at some point, you know. So you just select your point and go in. And it's watching for undulations, you know, crags and rocks and stuff like that. That's when you do get into difficulty. But if it's smoothish, you can land on it. Yeah. There is a story for a French pilot actually flying in Lorraine in France. Came down near one of the rivers there. And the only place he could see that looked good was this great big sort of green area at the side of the river. He came in and landed, and this is in his final approach. He realized it was a reed bed. So he came in, did his flare, and then we got a radio message saying he was stuck, and his glider got stuck on the top of the reeds, and his feet were dangling. And I had to get the fire service in to rescue him. So the other difference, I think, is hang gliders do get into wave, but it's a reason for celebration when they do. It's these are some examples of when I've been in a wave. So these two there are a competition in North Yorkshire 3 years ago. 3 years ago, and just to kind of show that was a competition, right? There was points in it, yeah. But we got into wave straight off takeoff, and nobody went in the task for an hour and a half. That's kind of how wave is perceived, and it's a different thing. This is a flight from it's before digital cameras anyway. This is a flight about 14 years ago, 10,000 foot in wave over the top of Ben Nevis, with a launch from Glencoe. And top right, you'll probably recognize that. That's a wave flight here at Bishop. And these are so significant for me. I've actually kept a photograph of the cross-section of the wave from that date, which was October 2009, it looks like, yeah. So we do get into wave, but, you know, the key thing is jumping forward a bar is unheard of. You'd have to be some sort of god to get forward in a bar. I've never managed that. But downwind, crosswind, you can do a lot in wave, you know. And I suppose that kind of sums it up for me. These factors I've just given, I mean, the size of the playing field is bigger in terms of gliding, but there's an overlap between them. They're not necessarily a duplicate. So a hang glider, generally speaking, you know, not generally speaking, lower, shorter distances and all the rest of it. So you've got a smaller geographical zone, but you can get a lot lower and still make a lot out of the day. My experience so far in gliding, with the concerns about landing and so on, and particularly in Scotland, is you can't make the same use of that lower airspace that you can with a hang glider. But similarly as well, you can play upstairs with a sailplane, and that for me is one of the attractions. If they were both the same, I'd just be as well stick with a hang glider. But the fact that they do overlap and there is this kind of extra world that it opens up to is why I think they're absolutely compatible as sports. The other big difference, I think, is your attitude, as in facing down or facing up. That's a big change for me in terms of flying in a glider. And it actually, at this point in time, I've gained, because reading the clouds is much, much more of what it's about. In a sailplane, you're looking up, you're looking for the dark patch in the cloud. We do that in a hang glider, but it's not the bulk of the time, yeah? You're looking down a lot more. And so, you know, having more landing options, having poorer performance, the line of view point down means the percentage of time you spend looking at low features and things happening low down is much, much higher. And you're more likely to be influenced by the things you see in the ground rather than the things that you're seeing in the air, from my experience so far. Yeah, that's an example of what we can do as well with these factors. It is absolutely not that much of an issue for a hang glider to drift along in a zero for 2-3 miles, yeah, waiting for it to kick off from a trigger, yeah, and that would be perfectly normal, yeah. And in fact, the number of times I've sat in a field having landed short of the goal, only to see someone dribble past me at 400 foot and get all the way to goal, is quite depressing. So, you know, that's one thing that I don't see the equivalent of that in sailplanes, but I might be wrong in that. So just be interested to talk about that one, actually. The other thing is slower airspeeds gives you a greater visibility of subtle changes in the air. Yeah. The view of the ground helps you to understand your heading, your track much more than you would in a sailplane, in my experience. So this is, if you've got a thermal, if you're going up and down a ridge and there's a thermal just approaching the ridge. Yeah, the effect of that is you get a slowing of the wind on the ridge. Yeah. Now on the hang glider, I can sense that I can feel the drift is actually taking you out to it. So I know there's a thermal just out from the hill. And the thing is, if you leave too early, you're still going to end up down. But that I've not sensed that yet in the sailplane. And one of the things that's interesting to know if that new Hawk product can actually help with that sort of thing, because there's quite often I'll be flying in a thermic day in relatively light conditions, and you'll be able to tell by the drift where the thermal is drawing, particularly at low level, you know. And it's not every day, it just depends on the characteristics of the day, but when it does work, you can pick that up just by the differences in the track you see as you're looking at the ground. Yeah. The other thing as well, which is kind of related to that, is one of the skills in hang gliding you have to develop is if you're launching on a light wind day, you're standing on a hill. And if you launch at the wrong time, you're at the bottom. Yeah. So sensing what's coming through and when it's going to come through, the cycle is what you call it, is a skill you have to develop. And the best pilots in hang gliding competitions are also the best at choosing the right time to take off. And that's about subtle changes in the air and does the wind coming over the back and so on. Keep an eye out for cues. So if you're much more tuned into things moving around in the air, to the actual wind direction you're seeing against the trees and so on. And I think that's another thing that I kind of so far I'm not seeing in sailplanes. But I'd be interested to see if anyone has got techniques to pick up on that, because it's an interesting thing. The other piece is the circle for thermaling. I've got an app actually, which you put your IGC in, and it tells you, just gives you a distribution curve of the size of the turns you're putting in. And this is, they're both two flights I'm going to show, are both similar flights, but 100-meter radius seems to be where I'm norming, if you like, when I'm on the sailplane. Yeah. This is me again, similar sort of length of flight, 50-meter radius on the hang glider. And you can see the distribution curve there. I'm down to 60 meters occasionally on the glider, and down to actually less than 30 meters occasionally on the hang glider. So that the kind of scale of what you're flying is very different in terms of the size of the core that you're working. And that's why I think some days, you'll see a sailplane shoot past the hang gliders, and other days the hang gliders will shoot past the sailplanes, just depending on the nature of the size of the cores. But that does mean to get to optimize a core that tight, you're working a lot harder on coring. The experience so far with gliding is that the therming is more of a method. It's a kind of quite methodological, whereas in the hang glider there's a more feel, but that might just be that I'm not that kind of experienced yet on the sailplane. So there's definitely some difference there in terms of the way you fly, and that means a lot of the times you'll fly micro lift. When I go up on Bishop on the hang glider, I'll know which particular small pocket of that ridge will work, and I'll sit in that and work it really hard. Whereas generally speaking, the sailplanes are taking the whole span in, and not doing that. Now, ultimately, the gliders get further. It's just a difference in technique, but it does kind of focus you on maximizing the value of these very small pockets of lift that you would get, because it's almost essential to do that in a hang glider to kind of achieve good flights. The other thing in terms of differences, hang gliders at best have crude farm systems. Yeah, the whole lookout arrangement, although I said it's similar in terms of the two, what I find is that with the visibility in a hang glider is way better than it is in a sailplane. So this is actually one of the things I've done since I took up gliding, is in terms of speaking to people in the hang gliding community, is emphasizing the importance of FLARM, because of that fact that visibility is so different between the two different craft, and it does require a different kind of level, a level above in terms of being observant and doing your lookout in a glider compared to a hang glider. So that's key differences. I just thought I would pick up on, this is one particular flight that we did in a competition last year. I just kind of put all these things together and explain how I got through there. This task, it was a relatively weak day. It was, the cloud bases were 2,500 foot when we started the task, and went up to about 3,300, something like that. Because it was such weak conditions, they set a race to 50 kilometers. So what they do is they draw a radius around the launch, and it's the first person to get to the 50-kilometer point in that radius, and you choose which direction you go. Yeah. So I chose to head off. Now, section one, absolutely the same as a glider. I was flying the gaggle, right? So there was a big gaggle of us left from the Malverns, and basically just worked, watched other people, joined in the best climb, hopefully out-climbed and so on. So we carried on to the end of this section here, and you'll see that zigzag was me being a bit indecisive, and that indecisiveness resulted in me deciding to go a different direction from the gaggle. And you'll see at point 2, the main thing I used to get that climb was birds. And that's a really big thing in mid-Wales. There's kites everywhere. And observing birds low down coming up is unbelievably valuable when you're flying. I struggled to do that in the sailplane so far, but in a hang glider, that makes a big difference. So 2 was birds. 3 was just going for a classic trigger. There was a town there. What was it? Leominster. Leominster was looking nice and hot. You could see the flags on the top of the Tesco's going different directions and the rest of it. So tucked in there, climbed out, and again joined by birds to help me kind of pick up the core from there. It got interesting after that, because after that top out of 4, it started to get overcast. It was overdeveloping and spreading out. So at that point, the decision was there was a patch of sun about a kilometre, kilometre by kilometre, just where 5 is. So instead of going direct down towards my 50-kilometre goal, I headed off to the sunny spot. Got very low. It's 400 foot above the ground. At this point, I actually had my zip undone, about to get my legs out. And what you could see on the ground was there was a forest, and you could see the leaves being disturbed in a particular part. You could see the leaves being disturbed in a particular part, which you could see was a thermal coming up through the trees. So pulled into that, again, still about 400 foot, and worked it. And in that particular bit, this thing about drift came in as well. It was quite a light day then, so I actually changed my position. I left that relatively weak one because I could feel it skewing around towards where it started. Went back, joined up to the same point again a second time, then climbed out and glid to the 50-kilometre mark. I won that day. But it's interesting that the methods or observation of the ground, the only time I mentioned the sky was the fact that it had overdeveloped, and I knew that area was dead, And it'd be interesting to know if that is similar to what you do in a sailplane, because my perception so far is it's not necessarily the same. But would you be out in a day with 2,500 to 3,000 foot cloud base? So that I thought was a good example of kind of typical flight. So what about the differences? Safe flying, weather envelope's different. You get a lot more flying in a sailplane over the winter. There's no doubt about that at all. In fact, generally speaking, through the year, the amount of flying you can get is vastly greater. The launch technique relatively wind direction agnostic, which is a big bonus for flying gliders. Hang gliders safe, launch up to 15 knots. Or white horses in the loch is what we usually look out for. So you can see the number of days you can fly in a glider and much more. Both sports are tolerant of a bit of rain. The one thing I have to say I found frustrating is easterlies, because you've seen all that stuff at Glencoe. That is an easterly slope, and we always go there in an easterly. And actually, if anything, it's not gliding; it's the position of the airfield is one of the frustrations, I think, in trying to pick up the two. But that's maybe one of the benefits of having both sports available to you. You can pick up on both of these things. And then finally drawing it to a conclusion, the real big difference is hang gliding can be a team sport. It doesn't have to be. Once you've done your training, you link up with a club, it doesn't have to be a team sport. Yeah. Straightforward progression post-training. There's a geographical dependency. There's a guy up in Orkney at the moment trying to learn, and he's put a hell of effort into learning. Cost per hour for hang gliding is inversely proportional to your enthusiasm. The more enthusiastic you are, the cheaper it gets. Yeah. And ownership is literally as simple as buying a bike. Yeah, literally as simple as that. When gliding, I would say it must be a team game. It doesn't work without a team game. And that brings lots of positives. That's a good thing. I would say the difficult progression post-training is one of my observations. And basically, the cost per hour is proportional to your enthusiasm, right? Which is quite a different paradigm. And that's where I think things like syndicates are really, really important. Access to syndicates because that then turns that paradigm into the one we've got for hang gliding, you know, and actually just makes the whole thing. Because that first time glide ownership is unbelievably complex. You know, I'm lucky to be in a kind of really kind of good syndicate, but you know, it could have been quite different. And whether I would just still be here if I had 6 months of no flying is probably a good question. But the key thing is it kind of leads back to this first thing. It's a team game, and you know, the reason I'm still here is because of all the team effort that goes on here at Portmoak, you know, and then, you know, across the whole gliding community. That I think is one of the really big differences between hang gliding. As you know, hang gliding can be, it doesn't have to be, but generally speaking, is a more of a lone sport. This is a must be and is a team effort. And I think that makes a whole load of new dimensions and benefits to it. So overall impression after 1 year, only 1 year, the overlap. Yeah, there's a lot of crossover between the two. If you have the time, the means, and hang gliding and gliding are very compatible and complementary sports in my view. To be confirmed in 5 years' time. So that's it. So if there's any questions or?
Well, I must say, I think that's a very, very good talk. I'm most impressed at you know, your comparisons to hang gliding to gliding. The thing that you spoke about the ridge, yeah. And I think that coming to the ridge, as glider pilots, we have to be disciplined because there's usually quite a few of us on the ridge. But if there's not a lot of people on the ridge, then I think, you know, people do still, you know,
crank it up.
Yeah, I really do, and that's a matter of, you know, striving for perception.
Yeah.
But it'll be interesting in a year from now, this business of looking down to looking up, as to how much, what your perception will be on that. Because I personally, gliders don't want to be low down, but that knowledge of being low down, I think hang glider pilots are at an advantage from that point of view. It's just depending, you know, where we have to use it.
There's an interesting thing happened to me last year. I was flying the British series in Yorkshire, and this was after I'd started flying gliders, and I won the day. And the main reason I won the day is this side of the valley I selected to fly. Both sides of the valley had really good looking clouds. Both sides had into slope because it was a sort of rounded hill like this. But I looked up that day and you could see there was a bit of a wave influence. So I consciously chose, I was below the wave, but I chose the side on the upward side. The rest of the gaggle went on the other side. And that I would not have looked up but for the fact I'd been on the, well, that's the XC development course actually. You know, it kind of made me more aware of the stuff up there is influencing the stuff down here. And I think that's where I think the benefits are going to start to come from both ways, you know.
Stewart, you're looking down is very similar to what glider pilots do in high mountains like the Alps.
Okay.
It's more ground orientated than cloud orientated. When you have really high mountains, because in most cases, between the valley floor and the peaks, you have about 3,000 to 4,000 feet. And most times the clouds are just above the peaks.
Yeah.
So you have to fly similar to that.
Yeah, I see using the features.
Yeah.
It makes a massive difference. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah.
I've got a question for you, Stuart. Throughout your whole briefing, you didn't mention your touchdown speed at all, and it's something I'd be interested in knowing. Is what speed do you actually touch down at when you land? When you land
a hang glider? Yeah. 0. Yeah. If you get it right. Yeah. You round out and round out. You feel it starting to flare. It's slightly different on a rigid. On a flex wing, there's quite a lot. You let your VB off, which is a VB is a bit like flaps on a flex wing, and it changes the nose angle. So it tightens up the whole sail and makes it, you know, much more twitchy, but much better performance. So when you're landing, you have it back. So you've got a lot of washout. So what you're doing, you're trying to flare just before the nose stalls. And then the idea is to instantly also make the tip stall. So the whole thing stalls in a oneer. That's why it's such a dramatic movement. And then if you get it right, you literally you could land on one leg if you get it right. You could land with no legs if you get it wrong. Yeah. The rigid's like more or less the same, but generally speaking, you end up just stepping it out, just at 5 miles an hour or something like that.
Yeah, cool. One other thing I'd like to point out is you mentioned looking down at birds coming up from below. I'm sure you're talking about big soaring birds.
Yeah, it was kites in Wales particularly. Yeah.
In Glasgow, I found that whilst they're a good indication of soaring, it's the swifts and the swallows that are feeding in the thermals that are the best.
Yeah, at the right time of year you get
the strongest lift is.
Yeah, and when I flew in France, you get that hell of a lot. In late summer, you get that hell of a lot as well. Yeah. And you've got a lot of stuff coming. I've actually had one thermal in Glencoe where my indicator of the thermal was a clump of heather. Yeah, at 6,000 foot going up, and I thought that looks worth an exploration. But generally speaking, if you see grouse thermaling, you're on. Yeah.
Hi. I flew hang gliders back in the 1980s. In fact, I was a member of the British team.
Oh, right.
and yeah, and I would query your observations about speed and precision in hang glider. And one discipline, I think it's probably a thing of the 80s rather than the 90s or the 21st century, was spot landings. In the early days, when you went to a competition, if it wasn't soarable, there'd be a duration on spot landing competition. Yeah. So you got pretty good at spot landings in that sense. And I never did the kind of flare that you described because I always felt that I ran a bit. Yeah. But just bearing in mind the spot landing, I can remember a particular day I was soaring on the east coast near Scarborough on a cliff site, and the tide was pretty well in. And for some reason, I know you're meant to watch out for this, but I was soaring quite low on the cliffs and the wind dropped off.
I know what's coming.
Okay. So I was too low to get in on top of the cliff and land. And I had to go down, and I was obviously given the wingspan. I couldn't get in to probably 1 meter, 2 meters of beach that was left out of the water. All right. So I'm cruising is the wrong word because it sounds relaxed, but I was cruising along, sinking slowly in front of the cliff, and I spotted sticking out of the water, not too far out to sea, a big rock. When I say a big rock, about the size of the roof of a transit van. Okay. And thank God I practiced spot landings. And I've done it in competitive conditions. Yeah. Because I lined up on this transit van roof. It wasn't a track, I said it was a big rock. And I knew that I had to get it absolutely right, because a popular way of dying in hang gliders and paragliders is going in water. Yeah. You get tangled up in all the kit and you can't swim or do anything and you drown. Okay. So I knew I had to get this right. And I got the flare smack in the middle of the transit van roof, okay? And then I basically disassembled the glider, put it over my shoulder, climbed down and waded through the water to the shore. And guess who I met when I climbing out up the cliff? The Coast Guard and his team who'd come to rescue me. So I laughed at them and said, "Thank you very much, goodbye."
Excellent.
Hi, Stuart. Great talk. Thank you very much. I'm amused to think of you with all this experience sitting there in your kitchen with a broom trying to figure out what yaw is. I think I've asked you this question before, but Maybe Tony's got an opinion as well. The transition from flying weight shift to flying 3-axis, how big of a risk is it, do you think, when the stress is on, that you revert back to your original training and you move the stick the wrong way?
So that was the point I was trying to make before earlier. It depends how you think of your flying inputs when you're in the hang glider. And if you think of them as where you move your body, so to accelerate, I put my body forward. To decelerate, I put it back. To go left, I move it to the left. To the right, I move it to the right. It's exactly the same as a stick. So if that's the model you have in your mind, which is a big question, then you're not going to have a problem. I have had issues with the rudder, I have to say, where I've where the broom handle's broken off again, but in terms of the stick, I've not had an issue with getting that right or wrong. Touch wood. But yeah, the rudder is a completely different kind of beast altogether. That took quite a while, and particularly on when it was a high stress situation, it'd be the thing you'd forget to do. And so just keeping an eye. I keep to refresh myself. But one of the things I do as part of my pre-check is visualize the rudder operating, and before I set off, just to kind of tune myself into it again, because that's definitely one of the risks. Yeah.
That makes me feel a bit better. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Doc.
Thanks. That's great. Thank you very much. I have a sort of related question to that about the differences. I'm sort of fascinated by this idea of being comfortable at 400 feet, because if a glider pilot is not on approach at that point, we're not comfortable.
Yeah.
And I've sort of two questions. One is, well, I suppose it's really one question. I'm just wondering how you work lift. What is lift like? I've never experienced what lift is like at that sort of height, and I sort of visualize it as being very scrappy and tiny, and it sort of comes together and grows into a proper thermal a bit higher. Exactly
it. Yeah, it's like tree roots. They tend to be very small. In my experience, there's two kind of scenarios. One is where you get a general area of very light lift and like zeros, halves, and all this, and that's the ones where you drift along, and you'll get to a trigger or something like that, and then it'll start to pick up. And that tends to be a kind of larger area. It's more difficult to drift out of it when that happens. But the other ones are just very small. A specific field has got a wee pulse that comes out, and quite often you'll find these pulses they'll pulse through for a few minutes, and then you're at the tail end of it. The energy's from the field's gone, and you're then hunting around for another wee pulse, And it's sort of, you're right, they're very small and quite often very short duration. But if you keep joining them up together, you start, as you get higher and higher, it gets more consolidated before you're in a classic thermal, nicely banked up, So that's my experience so far.
Yeah. Is that probably if you're down at 400 feet, you're already over your landing field.
Yeah.
So that is in the envelope, and you forget about that. You don't worry about that. Okay. And then the other thing to remember is that with a hang glider or a paraglider, indeed, you've got a very tight turning circle and a very good feel for the air mass. Okay. So given that you don't care about your landing field, it's selected, it's there, you probably could get away with turning at 200 feet and turning into your approach, maybe even 100 feet and turning into wind and landing. So you're not worried about that. You're totally loose. Okay. And then you feel this bit of a surge, and you've got a very tight turning circle. So you just whack it into that, just in the same way that you do in a sailplane, but on a bigger scale. Okay. And it's straightforward in that. And you develop a sense, a feel for those type of conditions.
You get a lot of feedback, particularly a flex wing glider, which is a rigid strut. You get a hell of a lot of feedback from someone coming up on one wing. The rigid, not quite so much, a little bit more sailplane like, but and it's small bullets you'll feel, very significant. And you'll, as you say, you'll bank it up really steeply to stay in a really small core for a short bit.
If I could add a comment to that, I mean, when I was flying from Limpsfield, you know, back in the 70s and all this sort of stuff, we had a lot of you know, quite old gliders like Ollies and Kirby Kite, stuff like that, and those gliders are low wing loading, fly very slowly, and you know, dare I say it, you know, sometimes glider pilots are down to 400 feet, and what you're describing is what you know, is what, you know, can be found even in a you know, modern sailplane. The problem is that the modern sailplane doesn't have the sensitivity that I'm sure that actually if you flew the T21 regularly, you know, the T21 would provide that sort of feedback, you know, to feeling the air mass. You know, it's just our performance has become, you know, our gliders become, you know, higher low speed, well, higher speeds for but the old gliders like the Ollies, as I say, Kites, T21, you know, I think you
got that lightness feel to sense it. Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I know that's one of the things I noticed just going from the K21s to the junior to the LS and all the rest of it is you know, gliders are very different in terms of, you know, and so, you know, a statement about one would not be the same for another. Absolutely. I think it's worth saying we don't sit at 400 foot across a Force Commission plantation. So yeah, but like, you know, Rannakamura or something like that, or the, you know, down south, you know, you've got, you know, it's not a problem.
Good question. I was just interested in your aerotowing. What do you aerotow behind?
Microlights, weight shift microlights, generally speaking. So Quantum is the one that they use. Yeah. And it's very similar to aerotowing a glider. You've got the same, you know, position the tug. You can still upset the tug. You've got all the same sort of issues. But yeah, I would say it's actually easier on a glider because you've got way more authority at the sort of speed you're being towed at, you know. So, yeah.
Right, we'll wrap it up there then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Honestly, Stuart, I thought that was fantastic. I thought it was excellent. Really good presentation, and really learned a lot there, actually. Good stuff. Yeah.
Thanks.
And, you know, thanks for joining the community.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Yeah.